JBS is owned by the Batista brothers. It's a Brazilian-owned company. And if I had my hat on again, I'd say this is what'll get me killed. But they bribed 1,800 federal Brazilian officials, including the Brazilian president.
Oh, shit.
And that's how they grew. They were a small meat processor, if I remember correctly, reading their history. And then they had this big vision. I mean, good for them, big vision, but it just destroyed where we're at. And so they bribed all of these people. They got in trouble. They got caught. This is all public record. You can go look it up. I'm not making this up. And so these guys, they get busted, they get fined and go to prison. But because they're uber wealthy, they didn't do very much time. And the amount of money that they had to pay was like a slap. It was a lot, but for them, it was a slap on the wrist.
How long ago was this?
Not long, within the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah. Damn. Okay.
Yeah. Brazil decides to write the USDA, which, by the way, they have sent their executives to the USDA to do classes, to do presentations, even within the last few years. They're a primary supplier. Of course, they're close to our federal government. But of course, our federal government's destroying us and not a favor. So it makes sense, right?
Let's go!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I Came With Fire podcast. Tonight we are here with AJ Richards, special guest. Man, I've been having for a long time this inkling. I wanted to bring somebody on to talk about food, and then specifically, like ranching, cattle, the American beef industry. This is something that affects our country, our food supply a lot. And finally have the opportunity to talk to somebody who knows a lot about it and is trying to do something to make the American situation better. And we'll get into all of that stuff. But yeah, man, go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody in the audience listening, and then we'll get into this interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. My name's AJ Richards. I'm from a place called St. George, Utah. Was born in Salt Lake, essentially, but raised in Utah my whole life. My family are fifth generation ranchers, probably now into the sixth generation. They homesteaded some of the last of the lower 48 back in 1916 on what we call the Arizona Strip. It's called that because it's cut off from the rest of Arizona, north side of the Grand Canyon. So it's an incredible place. It was an amazing childhood. But I grew up around that. Now, I joke, I'm the city slicker cousin. So I did the cattle drives and the brandings, didn't have the experience with the fence and the calf, but.
So you're Billy Crystal.
Yeah. So, when I was younger, I hated that. Cousins would tease me, call me city slicker. And I was pissed because I wanted to, be a rancher.
Jack Palance. Yeah.
Yeah. But I wasn't. And so then, joined the Army National Guard in Southern Utah. Deployed with them to Iraq, Ramadi, 05 to 06, came home, ended up selling pest control in Arizona, down in Phoenix. Okay. So now I live in the city. Hated every second of it. I am not a city person. I was there 12 years and it never grew on me. Great people, have a lot of friends down there, but I did not like living in the desert in a mass populated area.
Right.
So, in fact, I had an exit route like when I moved there because I'm like, shit. You're not getting out of Phoenix if you don't get out early. So anyway, that was a great experience. Grew a lot, learned a lot, started my first business. I opened a CrossFit gym down there, was the first one in Mesa.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Then I launched a company called Rush Club where we put CrossFitters head to head for weight title belts. You can still find old content. We grew that to 250,000 live viewers. We would fill arenas with 300 to 600 people that paid tickets to be there. But it was my first foray in business. And so I made a lot of early mistakes. I had a lot of people in my business with equity that didn't allow us to grow. Right. So lessons learned. It was fun. I learned a lot. It was amazing. I don't regret any of it. I had such a blast doing that. Yeah. So then we end up in Southern Utah again, back to St. George, where I'm from. And I started selling beef for my family's ranch. And that's where I started getting informed about the food supply. So I'll stop there and we can pick it up wherever you'd like.
Yeah, no. So you have a very heavy business background. So for what you're trying to do, you've learned a lot and had a lot of experience and to be successful now. But one of the interesting things you said before and go back to is how you didn't like living in the city. You talked about having an exit route. And we talked yesterday on the phone for a little bit kind of about this. About food deserts, right? You're literally living in the desert and how all of the food that gets shipped in to most places where people live isn't grown anywhere near where they live. And I'm sure Phoenix, cities like that in Arizona probably are much the same. I can't imagine, I've never lived in Arizona, but there's probably not a lot of agriculture there. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Right.
So it's just one of these things where people in the cities in general, and then Americans in general, don't get their food from anywhere local. It's not down the street. It all has to be preserved. It has to be frozen, shipped in. Some, especially if you live, a place like Alaska or Hawaii. So one of the things I think is interesting is cities and Americans and how much we are dependent on outside resources for food. And that's a problem that you are trying to solve, which is great. And I want to talk more about that. But I just think it's so funny that the United States in general is dependent on so many other countries for resources. And then in turn, the American citizen is so dependent on the federal government for its way of life as well. So it's become an infrastructure sort of on a loss of sovereignty, and then as well a dependence, a dangerous codependence on what is now a government who, in my opinion, doesn't care about you, the American citizen.
Yeah, right. And the thing is even if the government wasn't as bad, let's go back to 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Our food supply chain was still going to crumble. Like
Right.
if COVID didn't happen, we were eventually going to have a major food system disruption.
Sure.
COVID just showed us that and accelerated it. We were already that weak, so a black swan event triggered it. And then a year later, one of the largest slaughterhouses in the country was hacked, and they had to pay an $11 million ransom.
Yes.
In Bitcoin. So
what business? I'm sorry.
It was a slaughterhouse, one of the big, massive packing houses.
I'll pull it up so we know exactly what. But yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, continue.
Yep. Yeah, and so, my opinion is that because the food system has become so complicated, that's why we're vulnerable. Because now there's a myriad of things that could go wrong and cause widespread disruption. We have to truck our food so far. So if we have a fuel disruption, we've got an issue there. If we have hackers that get into the system, you got 85% of our beef is controlled by 4 corporations.
Right.
And so the amount of beef they're processing in a handful of facilities, what I came across in my research was something around 20 slaughterhouses. It could be more than that, but somewhere around 20 slaughterhouses process 85% of the beef that feeds 320 million people.
That's insane.
So that's a vulnerability. Those are soft targets.
Oh yeah.
It would not be hard to cause a major disruption in a snap of a finger, coordinated, and throw us into famine. So that's another one. The list goes on, and so it's because we're so complex that we're so vulnerable, and we can be taken down in many aspects. Right now, we have 1948 cattle numbers.
Okay.
With 2024 population in America.
Oh, wow.
So we're fully dependent on foreign imports for our food.
Is that, if I may, is that per capita or is that in total?
In total. So there's actually, there's a little over 87 million head of cattle. Now,
so
87
just
million,
for context, sorry. No, go ahead. Finish what you're going to say. I was going to say
87 million, they are counting every heifer, mama cow, every heifer, every cow, every bull, every calf, every steer, the 87 million of all of them. You can't eat them all, right? So if we said, okay, we got to slaughter what we've got, and then even take that into consideration. My family, we have 4 people. It's me and 4 women. No, 3 women. My wife and 2 daughters that live here. We eat a whole cow a year. We eat
okay.
We eat a lot of beef. We eat a whole cow a year. So you take 87 million, but we have 320 million Americans to feed. And then add another 20 million illegal immigrants that cross the border.
Exactly. I'm going to ask you a really, really dumb question that I know the answer to.
Okay.
We have a lot of people asking for a friend. I promise.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people. We have a lot of people that come across the podcast. Can you explain what you just meant by that? Every head, every heifer, every cow, every steer. Can you please explain that for people that don't understand the beef industry?
I'm so glad you asked, because I try to remind myself that we're educating, right? Marketing for us is not traditional marketing. We're just re-educating
We
the
have to-
American public.
We have to do it all the time when we like loop into military speak. We're all just doing Army acronyms, and it's like, I got to step back. Hold on, people don't know. So please.
So so you have your bulls, and usually you've got like one bull. If you're a ranching expert, I'm not. I've already told you I'm a city slicker cousin, so
yeah,
little bit of grace here. But I've if I remember correctly, one bull for about 50 head of heifers, of female cows that are ready to be impregnated.
Get that boy a Gatorade.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Oh man.
So
a couple of them.
So you've got about that many of to breed that's needed to breed that many heifers. Girl cows ready to be impregnated.
Got it.
Not been yet. Okay.
Yep. A cow is a female that's already is having babies. So a heifer is a female unbred.
Okay.
A cow has had babies and is having babies.
Gotcha.
And then you have your steers. A steer is when a male cow is born, and then they castrate it, so you don't get all that testosterone. And then the whole purpose of that animal is to be fed out over time, grown and fed out, to then be sold. That's their primary value.
Right. And the reason sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah, please.
No, sorry. And the reason that they do that traditionally, or in the culture I grew up in, is because you're looking for the genetics that you want in your herd, and not every male makes the cut, right?
Right.
Well, most males make the cut. Not many don't make the cut.
Well, not all.
Case.
And there is a market for veal, right? Because of that.
Yes.
But the reason I was going to say that is because I come from dairy country. So in dairy country, we look at the female section of the herd, right? Whereas ranchers look at the male section of the herd. So it's a very different way of raising cows, because you want your cows. And so we look at the heifers, and there's only ever one bull probably for multiple dairy farms. And that guy like shops him around, and then he breeds the heifers, right? Then they have cows, and then boom, those cows go to the dairy farm, and then that's where they stay for the rest of their life, because we do it for milk. So it's a completely different business from what you guys are doing in the ranching side of things. But I find that very interesting that you said, right, 87 million head of cattle, regardless of what category they fall in, and that's what they're looking at. And that's very concerning to me. It's very concerning to me, because if you do that, then the American dairy industry is shut out too. Like it's not just the beef that goes out. Now it's the dairy industry that's gone too, which is now your milk, your cheese, your whipped cream, like anything that has dairy in it. Like now all of that's gone too. That's incredibly concerning.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this number might only be beef cattle. When I was reading the report, I don't remember making the distinction, right? So, but that is important what you're saying, because I mean, even still, now you're eating your beef cat. We're talking about having no food, and so now you're eating your dairy cows as well, right? And,
let me circle back real fast to what you're talking about. So the cyber attack I think you're referring to was the JBS ransomware attack. Is that the one that you're referring to?
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah. So the article says that it disrupted production across the U.S. and Australia, both, and that they had to temporarily shut down all of its United States beef plants, which process almost a quarter of the nation's beef supply, along with the plants in Australia and Canada as well. So that's a big deal, right? And then just think of,
Was that in 2020, 2021?
This is 2021. Yep.
So that was when we started hearing about all those random fires that were at food processing plants and
chicken farms too got hit. I remember there was a lot of those chicken farms that caught on fire.
A bunch of weird, and all that news just like kind of flew under the radar because of we're not supposed to say it. It flew under the radar because of all that. But all that stuff was happening around the same time.
Yeah. And then just for everybody listening, go back to what you said, 1948 cattle numbers with 2024 population. So in 1948, the estimated population in the United States was 146 million. So it's over twice what it is now today, right? Today is twice what it was then with the same number of cattle. And you don't need to be a genius to understand why that's a problem. But one of the things I wanted to make a point on too is that ransomware attack shut that down. And I like to paint the picture of just how quickly everything can get shut down because everything is so connected. This new world we're living in, the Internet of Things, and how everything is automated. We talked about SCADA before, security controls, stuff like that. But just think about what happened in July with the whole CrowdStrike outage for those airports and how fast that went down. The ransomware attack, this one, 2021, how fast that went down. And then you compound it with what you're talking about your cattle and what you can have. I wanted to ask you about that because you guys, at ranchers in general, because then you say you're not a rancher, but people in that industry, they have a mandated number of cattle that they are allowed to have, right? And that varies across the United States?
Yeah, so it depends on if you have private ground. If you have private ground, you can do what you want. But if you're leasing ground, specifically, because most of the West is controlled by the Department of the Interior. And in the Department of the Interior, you've got the Bureau of Land Management.
Yep.
Then you've got the National Forest Service. I think they're all under the same division. And then you've got U.S. Parks. And so you've got all these different divisions that now control the majority of the ground, the public lands in the West. Now, that's a good and bad thing. If you go back east and you want to go hunting, you got to get permission to hunt on private ground because there is not a whole lot of public ground to be on.
True.
So the West, having not so much be private owned ground, we have the ability to go four-wheeling, to go. Thanks, babe. She brought me some water. To go
hey, all right.
backpacking, hunting, to do all these things. I text her. I'm like, hey.
I do that too.
So to do all these things that we enjoy in the West, and so that's the good side about having public lands. Now, on the bad side, you have bureaucrats in DC making decisions for us that they're clueless on. And so what you're referring to, Brandon, is what they call AUMs. It's animal units per something. I'm not even going to try.
Per mile, maybe?
Or per measure or something like that.
Yeah.
Basically, it says they go out and do the studies on how many ruminating animals live in that area. Elk, deer, pronghorn, buffalo, like where I'm at.
So not just domestic.
Nope. And then they say, based on the forage, you can only carry this many cows per acre on your leased ranch. And most ranches in the West, the majority of their ground, hundreds of thousands of acres, is leased. And so down where a lot of my family are ranching, they're only allowed to have one pair, mama cow, baby cow, per acre.
Okay. Right.
So that's why the average rancher only has 30 head of cattle. But where I'm from, it's 100 to 300.
Is that because... So... Why are so many ranchers leasing land? Are the ranchers not able to afford the land based on the business itself? So leasing it out? Because I know back in Wisconsin, this is that's where I'm from, by the way. A lot of dairy farms are leasing the bulk of the land that they used to have their dairy cows grazing on. They're turning them over to like Christmas tree farms and other USDA projects to raise pine trees and other things that they do. They lease it to the state because a lot of them have just become family-owned tiny farms. And it's like, we can't afford to keep up this 80 acres, 120 acres. It happened to my wife's family. Is that the same thing that's happening out West? The ranchers just can't afford to keep up their own ranches?
Well, yeah, because ground in the West is expensive. Like there's a ranch down the road for sale. It's 250,000 acres and it's $67 million. You will never, ever pay for that raising livestock.
No.
And so yeah, you can't buy the ground. You have to lease it. My cousin bought a ranch that's 600,000 something acres. 40 of it he owns. And it's it was an expensive ranch.
Because 40 acres out of 600,000 acres.
Yep.
That's wild.
And so that was part of his business plan that he bought
that's
the whole
everybody's
thing and then
That's how it works. Unless you're the Duttons and you've
Bill
inherited
Gates?
from
sure.
Yeah, it got passed down from generation to which those families exist, and I'm so grateful. And I look at those people and I'm in awe because their family was able to figure out how to hold vast areas of ground for generations and keep producing when the world around them was being developed for ski resort towns. You know,
Right.
Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the average home now is $7 million.
Where's your brand, bro?
That's incredible.
Where's your brand? Because you got from.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's insane.
When
Oh, go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry.
No, you're good, man.
Are there any lands around you there in Utah that are owned by China? Do you know?
Yeah, dude. Right outside
Great
of
question.
Dugway Proving Ground. Dugway Proving Ground, if you look that up, they've got, this was all over the news as one of the primary locations that they should not be there. And right outside of Dugway Proving Grounds. And when I was in the Guard, we would train out there. That was where our summer AT was. That place has got all kinds of secrets going on. Well, they were secrets, you know.
Right. Well, there's a lot of places in Wyoming like that.
Yep, that place is also where they tested nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, and so a lot of my family's history have died from cancer because they were downwinders. So China owns ground right next door to Dugway. Lots of it.
Plus, obviously, there's F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, which has a ICBM field. And just the same as I was at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is, again, has an ICBM field. And that was a concern there. There was Chinese-owned wind farms around Malmstrom in that area. And then the same thing there that runs up through Wyoming. We talked about this on another podcast about how the main highway corridor that runs through there runs past F.E. Warren, and all of the cell towers that run along that highway have Chinese components inside of them. And the concern, obviously, is it could be jamming components, because obviously all these ICBMs, they talk to places that use radio frequencies and things like that to have first strike capability, right? So it's not a good thing that they have and own all this land. I understand the economic reason why you want foreign countries to come in and purchase land and purchase and own businesses, because of the economic ties and the money that it brings into the economy. But a place like China, proven now, is not, it's an enemy of the United States. Right. Should be able to say time to go.
I also wonder. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, there's a farm, just for context on this. If you're driving on I-90 and heading east, and you get just east of Snoqualmie Pass, you come down out of the pass, and right as you hit the plains in western Washington, there's a barn on the right side of the highway, which would be driving east, right side, the north side of the highway, that they have a sign on top of the barn next to the silos, and it says, like, this is the name of the farm, and blah, 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 blah. And as we were driving by there the last time I was going home for leave, it flashed, and then the same sign came up in Chinese letters.
What?
On the barn. And I looked at my wife and I said, why are there Chinese characters on this sign on this barn in Washington in the United States? It was wild to me, but it's right there. It's
bureaucrats.
Overt, right? And it's right there. And like some of them I
on purpose
read, some of them I couldn't, right? But I was just like, that was wild to me. But AJ, you were gonna say, I'm sorry.
I don't remember what I was going to say because that was good.
Okay, perfect.
That's okay.
I do have a question for you then. So looking at the ranching industry, right? And going back to, this is a thing, my wife and I, we're a little bit crunchy. We're a little bit like, we like to be healthy. I'm a medic by trade. So I tell my family, anytime that you can save yourself from going to the doctor by being healthy, you save yourself money in the long run, right? Like, stay healthy, stay away from the doctor, the whole apple a day kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you think the old school original food pyramid affected your business of ranching? Because it used to tell us, right, if you looked at it, down here you were supposed to eat 11 servings of grains a day, and then you were supposed to eat, like, on top of that, then came dairy or whatever it was, and then all the way at the very top, right, was like protein, like a little bit of protein. And now what we know is, like, if you turn that like this and then fill it in the other way, you're actually probably more healthy than you've ever been. Like, it should be all all red meat, all like, like good quality grass-fed protein, and then like your dairies, and then your grains on the very top. Like you need very little of them. How, like, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of that was
business?
subsidies. So subsidies
Okay.
came into play, and so grain became the thing, corn and grain and all of that stuff through subsidies. And so that's all tied to the get big or get out movement of Earl Butz, who was head of the USDA in the 70s, if I remember right. But they had already started prior to that. Let me read this quote real quick. So in the 1930s, they started moving people off their farms because manufacturing started slowly coming online. They were trying to move people into different industries. And so there's been a concerted effort to get people off farms and get farms bigger. In 1930, we had 6.8 million farms. We now have 1.8 million. Over the last 5 years, 20,000 ranchers a year went out of business over the last 5 years. So we've just been on this massive decline, and it's dropping again. Like you can see
5 years.
In 5 years. Yeah. And so what happened is, so in 1962, and it's from the basically economic development Commission for Economic Development for our government. Okay. And so this is their initiative. And this is a quote: "The movement of people from agriculture has not been fast enough to take full advantage of the opportunities that improving farm technologies and increasing capital create." So what they're talking about is mechanized farming.
Okay.
Produce more, get the small guys out of the way. So these people that knew how to monetize this, they needed more ground under their control so they could make the profit, right?
Okay.
It looked different back then because technology wasn't around, but it was the same initiative. And so that's what they're talking about. The CED proposed an adaptive approach. So the beatings will continue till morale improves or till we get what we want, right? That's what they're saying.
Yep.
An adaptive approach to utilize positive government action, there you go, to facilitate and promote movement of labor and capital where they will be most productive. The goal: move 1/3 of farmers off farms in 5 years. That was a directive by our federal government in 1962. Then you bring Earl Butz in, and he says, get big or get out. And then we find out, I've got this really good friend. You guys should have him on the podcast. His name's Dustin Kittle. He's an attorney. He's an ag attorney, and he's a farmer in Tennessee, I believe. He's got some amazing livestock. I can't think of the name of it, but Snow Creek Farms, I think. But anyway, so he's a victim of this, which is why he's made it his personal mission to uncover it. And he's been working on a case for, I think, 10 years. So Farm Credit is a federal organization that was put in place to help keep our farmers and ranchers in business. He has uncovered that they have intentionally foreclosed on these American farmers and ranchers and are selling it to foreign interests. So it's corrupt at the deepest levels, and it has been. Our government has been actively working against our food supply chain, our food sovereignty, our farmers and ranchers intentionally, not by accident, since 1930. And so now that's where we're at.
Two things. I'd like to know, you said he was an agriculture attorney. I'd like to know if he's doing anything like litigation wise about that. But the other thing too, I just want to say is there's such a direct correlation between the government doing this, trying to force small farmers out, and then to let these larger corporate farms take over. There's a direct correlation between those sorts of actions and the loss of sovereignty and the codependence on the federal government that you see in so many other areas too. And you and I talked about this on the phone, made the correlation of this is big food, right? There's big tech, there's big pharma. All it is just this funnel of money and ability to the top to control it. These different oligarchies in their own individual silos. that's all this is. It's 100% an intentional thing to create this codependent, this unhealthy codependent relationship that now Americans have almost no choice but to participate in, which is why certain, just certain things you should want the ability to do. And we've not just lost the ability to, but don't have the capability either of doing it. And there's two different things.
I was just thinking about this today. We have no right to not be growing our own food.
Mm-hmm.
As individuals, we have no right. What we assume is just there for us and we deserve it.
I like the way you put that.
We don't have that right. Like when it turns off, you're going to be like, shit, I should have been doing something. I promise you.
Yeah.
These are the real numbers. Like what we're doing with From the Farm is the most we can do right now. Mm-hmm. And, if I ever have a chance to write a book, it's going to be called Almost Fucked, because that's where we're at.
That's amazing. I love that. Almost fucked. Yeah.
Because we are almost, but almost could be tomorrow. And then it's not almost, it's we are.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So we as people, what right do we have to think that somebody owes us? There's always groceries in the grocery store.
Dude. Yeah.
That's complacency. So
complacency. Yep.
Yeah. And so we already talked about the numbers of cattle. Okay, great. Let's say the supply chain keeps coming in for beef. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean the same thing. There's not going to be, now that they can control the weather, that doesn't mean there's not going to be some catastrophe on some major crop farm somewhere that wipes out a bunch of produce. Mm-hmm. Do I need to change hats for this conversation?
Oh, dude, I love that. Yes, is that a fucking dude? That's it. Yes. Please. That's amazing. I need to create a tinfoil hat for the pod, man. I got to get on it. Always wearing a hat. I don't own a tin one. That's going down.
You just said something that I think makes you
mode flipped.
He said, now that they can control the weather, he just dropped it and rolled through.
Dude, yeah. That's amazing.
Continue.
We don't got to explain it anymore. These are just facts, right? We just say what it is and keep moving, because there's a lot to talk about. So
teach us,
I made this hat because people are like, man, that's some tinfoil hat conspiracy. And I've said,
every tinfoil, 10-gallon, don't matter.
We're going to reappropriate it. So, yep, you can call me tinfoil all you want.
There you go.
That's RFK was called a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, and that guy has the best plan for agriculture of any candidate in decades.
Can you map that out a little bit? You seem to know a lot more about it than Chris and I do.
So RFK has been personally involved with friends of mine that are focused on the advancement of regenerative agriculture.
Okay.
And not just lightly exposed, like, he's all in. He understands that this is the solution, not for the climate change agenda BS that's going on, but for desertification. Desertification is a real thing, and that's caused by, a lot of things. If you want to visit that conversation, we can. But we can take what we've destroyed in the desert in 100 years. Mother Nature will say, "Hold my beer and watch this," and in 5, restore it to what it was. It's a miracle.
Naturally. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Chris.
Can I riff on that for a second?
Yep.
So through COVID, right? I've been on the military bases for the last 4 years. I live on a military installation. It only took 2 years. The deer population on JBLM Washington went from people would see a deer on post to this year, 2024. I have a herd of 12 does that comes through my front yard every single morning, and
crazy.
They just started sectioning off, because you guys know the rut. Anybody that deer hunts, they just partition themselves off, and then I have a group of 4 to 6 little bucks now, little spikes and forkhorns that comes through my yard about 2 hours after them every single day, and I see them every single day. And that went from, again, 2 years ago, people would see 1-2 deers on post. It was 2 deer on post, and now it's like there's a whole herd that live here, and that was in 2 years, just from people not going out of their houses. Like, have you guys ever seen I Am Legend?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's that famous scene where he goes ripping through downtown New York in his Mustang, and there's lions and all that shit. Out of the zoo.
Yeah. The zoo.
It will not be that long. Like nature,
no.
To quote Dr. Malcolm from Jurassic Park, like, life finds a way.
For sure.
Like, you're absolutely right, AJ. Like, it will not take that long after we're gone that it will completely reclaim. And I mean, look at the weeds that come sprouting up through the cracks of your sidewalk every
literally
summer.
just thinking that.
Right. Yeah, it's the same thing. But you were on a bone, dude. Keep going, keep chewing it.
Well, and so when it comes to RFK, he gets that. He knows that nature doesn't have the problem. We're the problem. How we do agriculture is the problem. And, there's a saying, it's not the cow, it's the how. That's the problem. And so if we go back to regenerative agriculture, for those that don't know, is simply, it's not simple, but because it's understanding nature. But what it is mimicking nature. So if I wasn't here, what would have happened without me? Because without me, it was working really well. Well, what happened in the West, and the reason that these back to the AUMs are a problem, the reason we're having the wildfires, the reason we're having desertification is because there's not enough ruminating animals on the ground. Now,
not enough nutrients, you mean?
Yeah. So the rumen from the gut of the animals, that was what puts the nutrients in the soil.
Right. Okay.
And when I say, hey, go find me a pile of manure that's fertilizing the soil, and you're looking for one cow pie in 1 acre.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Right. So now there's a whole host of a chain of things that are also now broken in that, because we killed off all of the predators that kept the ruminating animals bunched together. So they couldn't just spread out and eat the ice cream and skip the veggies, right?
Right.
So they could just they were no longer in competition for food. And when animals are in competition for food, they eat everything, and everything is good for them, but they have a palate just like we do. And so they'll prefer something.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So now they're only taking what they like and then overgrazing the stuff that they like. And now it goes away. Now you have more of the sagebrush and other things that are dominating.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've moved the predators. We also put fences up everywhere. So now big herds can't migrate. A deer can jump fence, no problem. I'm talking highways, like we just broke their natural moving path.
Yeah, exactly.
So now they can't move. And also, when we were controlling the West in the early, settling of America, we killed off all the bison to force Native Americans onto reservations. It's happening again. They are destroying rural communities so everybody moves into urban environments, because that's where you get your food, your power, your water, your shelter. The rural communities are dying. It's just a repeat in a bigger scale.
Yeah. A loss of sovereignty. Yeah.
It was about control and taking sovereignty then. It's control and taking sovereignty now, right? So, but that's what's happening. That's what regenerative agriculture says. Okay, we're going to take all of those things into mind that used to be, and how can we mimic? So if I put up smaller paddocks in my big pasture, and I keep my animals closer together, now they're in competition for their forage. And I'm the predator, so I'm going to move them every day. So they have to be in competition and eat all the different things that they're supposed to eat, and put manure down in concentration, right? That's easier to do on your brain. Yeah. It's saying, okay, we're going to mimic nature.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny about that, AJ, is are you a Bible believing man?
Oh yeah, God's called me on this mission. That's why I'm doing it.
Oh, well,
I love that.
Fantastic. So if you go back into the Old Testament, what you were just saying really reminds me of the way that God told the original Israelites when he said, hey, I'm going to put you on a 7-year plan. And as you put your animals out to pasture, make sure that you rotate them. And then every 7 years, let one pasture rest. For 1 whole year. You don't, right? That's your farmer's tithe. You don't do anything with it and continue to rotate them. It's almost like, God gave us a regenerative agricultural plan to his people back in the day. If we were to pay attention to it, it sounds a lot like what you're talking about now. I just wanted to pluck that out of the, it really sounds pretty close. I'm not telling people to eat kosher or anything.
It's a good way to contextualize it, though. It's a great way to contextualize it. There's a natural order of things.
A lot of the guys that are Bible believing teachers that do teach regenerative agriculture, I've had this conversation with Dr. Alan Williams, and he said, yeah, it's biblical. That's what we're doing. Incredible. And I was like, oh, okay. So,
say less.
Yeah. So back to RFK. RFK gets this.
Yeah.
He also gets that big pharma and big ag are the culprits. And so our greatest threat to what we're creating to start a path forward, because we should definitely end this conversation on all the good things that are happening, because there are.
Yes, I want
But
to learn more.
but when we go this route of what RFK has in mind, we slowly start bringing back the way it needs to be. But our biggest threat will be lobbyists for the big food and big pharma organizations. So, I think we should just kind of, my main belief is there's the goal is intellectual food property, to put a label to it. So IP. When you look into it, you find out that the biggest shareholders in a lot of these spaces, big food and big pharma, is BlackRock and Vanguard. They're just duplicating. We talked about this on the phone, I think, yesterday, Brandon. They're duplicating and following the same game plan as big pharma. We're going to vilify and outlaw natural remedies that will heal you. I'm a believer in psychedelic medicine for PTSD and other traumas. It's an absolute blessing, right? And it's natural. So they vilify and outlaw. So now you can only buy their intellectual property, which is your SSRIs, your antidepressants and so forth, because you can't heal yourself because we've taken that away from you. Okay, well, now they've attached to this climate agenda that animals are the problem, cows are the problem, but we've got the solution. It's intellectual property in fake meat and lab-grown meat and insect burger. Yeah. So it's the same playbook. They're just now doing it to our food. And if they do it to our food, last thing, if they do it to our food, their goal is, and Callie and Casey Maines were interviewed on Tucker Carlson. I highly recommend that show. Go look up Callie and Casey Maines, Tucker Carlson. Big Pharma's number one goal is to have a customer for life. So their most profitable, and even RFK has said this, their most profitable client is a child. They don't want you dead. They just want you chronically ill your entire life. So you're on meds your entire life.
It's like that shady mechanic that won't actually fix your car, so you got to keep coming back.
Yeah.
The way we say it in my house is there's no money in somebody that's healthy, and you can only charge somebody that's dead one time. But somebody that's sick, you can charge them every day of the rest of their life.
Yep, exactly.
Nailed it.
Yeah. And it's all our ag. Listen, when you start really, like, everything is sourced from our soil and our soil health. It all begins there. As I'm a crunchy conservative too. When you said we're a little crunchy, I resonate. I'm a crunchy conservative. All life exists in the foundation of our soil. From the beginning to everything else is connected to that. Nothing we enjoy exists unless the people that are developing it are healthy. They're not healthy and they don't exist unless they have good food. They don't have good food unless it comes from good soil, and you don't have good soil unless you know how that works. That is the source. Like, I don't care. Elon Musk going to Mars doesn't matter if he can't be healthy, right? And so soil health, when you start looking at the soil health, is all around microbiology. And then you look in our gut, and our gut has a microbiome. It's the same thing. It's nature. This is God's creation. Wouldn't it make sense that they all work the same way? And so that microbiology, they call it your first brain. So if you feed your brain shit, it's going to produce shit. And now you have depression, anxiety, and all of the other things because your microbiome isn't being fed by healthy microorganisms in the soil.
Yeah. I was just going to circle back to what you were talking about. We're talking about the natural order of things. And you mentioned intellectual property, like foodstuffs, right? IP, something you shouldn't be able to own food. You can't so you cannot patent something that naturally exists, right? You can't say this rock, I'm going to patent this rock. You can't do that. So what are we laughing at? I'm so lost.
No, I'm sorry. Continue your question. I'm working very hard on not interjecting. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
These are the inner workings of my mind, Brandon, that I am working on tamping down. I can't help.
You're good.
So please continue your question.
No, I was just going to say that you should not be able to patent a food item, right? And so to what you said, I know people that use cricket powder for protein shakes. I know there's lab grown meat, which I will never knowingly purchase or eat. You creating something, that's how you can patent it. And it's not natural to do that. So if this whole plan about getting rid of farmers and having them to be corporate owned is tied into big pharma, big food. You know, it's absolute insanity and goes against the natural order to have a patent on food, something like that. It's privately owned. You can't even FOIA request it because it's privately owned, so you can't find out what's in it. It's just a complete and total disaster plan, and it goes back to exactly what you were saying before about how chronically ill people are the best customers. It's just this whole cycle of humans being stupid and that thinking we can do something better than nature, and not going back to like what you said before, the regenerative agriculture, trying to actually mimic that nature and doing something outside of that box that doesn't make any sense and is actively unhealthy for people.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you're absolutely right. The reason I was laughing is because I was thinking about Monsanto in the corn industry, and so
their seeds.
When you said that you can't patent food, I was thinking back from. Oh, you took the tinfoil hat off. You should probably put it back on, because we're a lot of people are think this is a lot of people are going to think what I'm saying right now is conspiracy, and it's absolutely not. If you go and look up Monsanto, they have genetically modified potatoes and genetically modified corn that they absolutely have a patent on the genetic structure of their genetically modified food, and what like
it's no longer natural.
It's no longer natural. And if you like two things, if you go back and you look at corn, right, for our pilgrim forefathers, right, it was a tiny little stalk that would look like a baby corn to you today, and now we have these giant stalks of corn, right, because it's all yield per acre. That's all they care about for the farmers. And so in the farming industry, right, it's yield per acre. And if, especially back in Wisconsin, a lot of people grow for Frito-Lay, and they grow for what's the other big one? It's slipping my mind. It'll come back to me later.
ConAgra?
But no, it's another big one that people would like, because Frito-Lay owns Lay's, and then this owns it. It'll come back to me. But anyway, so they grow for these people, but it's like, if you're going to grow for these giant, massive corporations, then you have to grow these genetically modified seeds, right? This is the farming industry, and it has to come from Monsanto. And what happens is, like, Monsanto will come in, and their corn still tassels and it still blows seeds around like any other corn. And so they will literally send in their lawyers, right? And they will take samples from small town farmers around these giant Monsanto farms, and go look this up if you think I'm doing a conspiracy theory. It's
seen
not.
it. No, it's real.
And they'll walk in, they'll pick an ear of corn from a small town farmer, and they'll go back and they'll sample it, and they'll be like, your corn tasseled with our corn, and now you have our genetically modified marker, which we patented.
Yep.
Right? Because they can.
Now we're going to sue you.
It, and now we're going to sue you because of
another way to attack small farmers.
Copyright infringement. Tell me how that fucking works. Copyright infringement on corn. But they do that, right? And then they go and they tie up this small town farmer in litigation forever, until he goes, I can't afford to raise corn here anymore. I can't do it. And then Monsanto goes, that's okay. Here's a, $1 million check. This all goes away, and now we own your little farm too. And now either sometimes they go, you grow our seed and you can keep owning your little farm, but now you lease it to us. Or sometimes they just go, we just bought it from you. This is ours now. Move out. And that's how they do in the farming industry. And that's how Monsanto owns more than you can fact check me on this one, Brandon, but I believe they own more than half of the farming land in the United States right now doing that. But I actually had this question on tap for you, AJ. Is there something like that in the beef industry where they're squeezing you guys out in kind of the same way? Or is there some kind of like cloning or anything that they're doing to squeeze you guys out, or is it just more on the
it's import exports
size? Imports.
Import exports is what's squeezing the ranchers out. They don't have a competitive marketplace. From the Farm was designed to, I spent 3.5 years researching and developing before we started building the software. So I had the idea, and then
let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, so I'll break it down real quick. So From the Farm is basically it's an online farmers market. You go on there, put in your zip code, and it's going to show you the closest farmers to you. Now we're growing, so you're going to find places where there's nobody close. But our producers that are on there are shipping. And I tell people, if you want to support them, these are great people to support and you'll help us grow, which means we'll eventually have your local farmers on here. So you go on there and you can search the map. You can just search like by your area, and you can even search for what you're looking for specifically. Now, most of our producers are beef, are livestock producers, because that's what I know. I'm working on getting connected with produce and dairy and everything else. So anyway, you go on there, you can shop, check out, do your business, connect. We've simplified the ability to connect directly with the farmer and rancher. They're too damn busy to do it any other way. And so we spent 3.5 years saying, what would make this better? Now, I sold beef for my family's ranch as I kind of ended about my journey in 2019. So I already went through all this. I knew personally firsthand, like, geez, if this existed, that would help me. And the number one thing I needed was somebody to do the marketing for me, because the only affordable marketing was Facebook, and Facebook always declined my ads unless I was sneaky about what I was selling, because if they caught on to me, they would decline it because I'm selling an animal. And when I would appeal it, I would try to appeal it and say, no, it's food. It's right. Not just food. It's USDA processed packaged food by the federal government. So I have the right to sell it, and they wouldn't let me. So PETA must be investing in them or something, but you can get around it if you pay them. Then you can go ahead and advertise beef all you want, but you couldn't put it in local Facebook groups, which is where the most value would have been, right? Because I was trying to sell local. And frankly, if that worked, I wouldn't have built this. That's why I built this, because the number one thing I needed help with was marketing. So now we've built a collaborative environment where the producers, it's their marketplace. It's theirs. They build a store. I was thinking about my 65-year-old uncles that are ranchers. I'm like, how can I make this really simple? And it's as simple as building a Facebook page. Now you've got to put your inventory and stuff in. So there's a little bit of time consuming, but it's not hard to do. It just takes time. So I designed this whole thing from 3.5 years of R&D. And I said, okay, now we're ready to code our first line of code. And even in that time, I ended up running a USDA slaughterhouse in Cody, Wyoming. And if you would have told me that in 2020, I would have quit for sure.
Is this hints from the farm? Is that what we're doing right now? Is that what you put that hat back on?
Yeah.
Got it. Perfect.
So I knew we were going to finish on that. I got to rep the brand. I need people to ride for the brand is what I need. So, so we built this thing, and frankly, it took as long as it did because I had a lot of self growth to do myself, because this is a behemoth. And dude, when I had this idea, I'm not kidding. I was driving Instacart on the side. I was working Walmart at night, doing whatever I could, because I'd just gone through that bankruptcy in Mesa and moved back home. And so who am I to do this kind of thing? This is freaking huge. I even tried to pawn it off, and God wouldn't let me sleep. For the next 3 weeks, I pictured the face of a man in Iraq when we took food to his family, care packages to their home. I never thought about that man in 20 years. But that was my favorite day, because I'm more of a humanitarian than a fighter. So I really enjoyed going into that. There's a picture of me playing soccer in full battle rattle. See if I can find it, with one of the kids on that day. The only time I thought about that day is when I pull up that picture, because it was a fun memory. But now I'm laying down at night, and I'm that man watching another group feed my family every night for 3 weeks. And I'm like, okay, God, who do I got to talk to? Because clearly you're not going to let me sleep. So I just started asking around, and I met my mentor, who's now a business partner and has been absolutely sent by God. Like, what's cool is, because this is fully God driven, the people that come into our sphere are the right people. We don't have to, if we know we need somebody, it will not be long before we meet the right person. We're like, yep. We open all of our meeting. We open our weekly meeting with prayer. Like, that's our culture, because that's what we're doing here. We are not building a company to flip it and sell it to the highest bidder. We can't, because that was the other thing God said. If you do it, it's not for sale. This is what you're doing for your life. And then hopefully for me, legacy, my kids keep it going. So the idea is that they control their store. The commission that we earn is about 10 to 15%. That is about the cost of running this whole business. So we are not even designed to make a profit off of the food sold. We're trying to just give them a competitive marketplace that they fund themselves, and we're going to kind of drive it and keep the wolves out, right? And people can trust us. Most people trust us to do that because this is who we are. Mm-hmm. And so our job is to then go find other ways to monetize the millions of users that'll come on the platform. But if I can partner with a knife maker that makes knives for $20 and sells them for 200, their margins are way better than anybody in ag. So why not build something phenomenal for the people with the producer going first, the consumer second, and then we are responsible for finding other creative ways that are still of value to the consumer. You know, we partnered with Redmond Real Salt, that they're an affiliate. Yep. Survival Seeds is an affiliate. So we're bringing on affiliate partners that are value-added products that have more value. You know, that's what I think it's going to change. I think the cost of lip balm is going to be far less than the cost of beef someday. But right now, people are cheap on their food and they'll go spend a bunch. You go think about how much you got in lip balm per ounce and what you spent on that, but you won't pay that much for your food.
Right.
So
I love seeing there's such a resurgence now in the country the past couple of years. And I think COVID has something to do with this too. But if people wanting to go more natural, homesteading, you talked about this when you were on Citizen recently, you talked about how much homesteading is coming back. But I love seeing it. It's a return to some of these things and recognizing, to me, it's a communal recognizing that the government does not have your best interests at heart. And then people taking back some of that individual sovereignty and learning how to do things and boxing the government out from them, which is exactly what needs to happen. Which I think is a great way to segue into. I would love for you to talk to us about the Sustains Act. I want people to hear about it. And I know that you are going to be great at educating everybody about it. We'd love to hear more.
Yeah. We were transitioning towards a good thing, but we do need to talk about this.
We'll wrap up on a good note. I promise.
Yeah. And I'm not in a hurry. So however long you guys want to keep going, I'm good. So the Sustains Act was passed with the Oconus bill. So it's already in. And like a lot of us knew about it in the ag space, but the ag space is really small. So a lot of people didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. And the government will claim that they listened to the people and this is what the people wanted, right? They'll claim that, but that's not true.
Yeah.
So it's already passed. So what the Sustains Act says is that, private entities can now openly fund USDA special projects for sustainability. That's how they have it worded.
Essentially legally lobbying big ag.
Yeah. Instead of bribery, now they can openly just pay them. And I'm very serious about that. So we talked about JBS earlier. JBS is owned by the Batista brothers. It's a Brazilian owned company. And, if I had my hat on again, I'd say this is what'll get me killed. But they bribed 1,800 federal Brazilian officials, including the Brazilian president.
Oh, shit.
And that's how they grew. They were a small meat processor, if I remember correctly, reading their history. And then they had this big vision. I mean, good for them, big vision, but it just destroyed our, where we're at. And so they bribed all of these people. They got in trouble. They got caught. This is all public record. You can go look it up. I'm not making this up. I've got so much information in my brain. Some of my details might be off. And as a disclaimer, everything I've said, go do the research. You'll find that I'm over the bullseye. I just might be on the edge. So
no, it's okay. You don't need to be exact.
Yeah. And so these guys, they get busted, they get fined and go to prison. But because they're uber wealthy, they didn't do very much time. And the amount of money that they had to pay was like a slap. It was a lot, but for them, it was a slap on the wrist.
How long ago was this?
Not long, within the last 10 years.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah. And so they move fast. You can do that when you bribe everybody.
Yeah.
But now it's not bribery. So if Brazil decides to write the USDA, which by the way, they have sent their executives to the USDA to do classes, to do presentations, even within the last few years. Like they're a primary supplier. Of course they're close to our federal government. But of course, our federal government's destroying us and not a favor. So it makes sense, right?
How much Brazilian beef is imported in the United States versus how much a beef grown in the United States? Like, what's the disparity there? There's got to be, I'm sure.
It's a lot, but I couldn't give you the exact number. I think the last thing I read, our highest importers are Mexico and Canada.
Okay.
Which they're also the ones responsible, primarily responsible, I believe, for the repeal of what's called MCOOL, Mandatory Country of Origin Labeling.
Mandatory
So
country. Okay.
there was a law that said if it came from another country, you had to label it. So when people bought it in the store, it said Brazil,
Right. Yeah.
Uruguay, Paraguay, wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because of some trade stuff that's way over my head, that got repealed because, Canada and Mexico complained.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when you buy beef from the store, it says USA, but it probably was just cut into steaks in the US, but it was raised and processed in Brazil and sent over frozen.
Yeah, yeah.
And then because they appealed it, they can now label it product of the USA.
I thought you would find it interesting. When you told me about the Sustains Act on the phone yesterday, I went and I like to do this little experiment. I'll ask Chat GPT objectively what it thinks about something. And this is what it says. It says that the National Cattlemen's Beef Association believes that this act will boost practical conservation measures already being implemented. These public-private partnerships will ease the financial burden on agricultural producers, helping them to adopt sustainable practices without compromising productivity. That's what it says it is. And it's such a positive, rosy outlook, right? I thought you'd find that interesting.
Can I say what my chat that I typed it into said? It said, the act allows for public-private partnerships enabling farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to participate in conservation programs and receive matching funds from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. It sounds so rosy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
When you say it like that, that's what my chat said to me. Yeah.
So let me add some context
because I wanted to get the what the average person that typed it into Google would get.
That's awesome. Yeah, let me add some context to what ChatGPT told you, Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
NCBA is the largest representation of cattlemen or cattle. I should say, it's called the NCBA, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, but they really more represent beef because if they represent the cattlemen, they've done a shit job because we're losing a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
That's regardless of it. First of all, let me just say this. If we only measured the NCBA off of the merit of their actions and their charter, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, just say, are we better off or worse since you've been in charge? If it's worse, you should get the fuck out of the way and let somebody else do it. I don't care about any of your other policies, but let's go into that. They're fully captured and they represent the export market, which is the large beef operations that send beef to foreign countries because they bring cheaper beef to America and sell it to us for more. And they take our premium beef and ship it to other countries and sell it there for more. Listen, they have to. They're private companies. Their job is to maximize profits. That's their fiduciary responsibility. So I get that side.
You could be removed for not upholding that fiduciary responsibility. Right. Yeah. There's a legal obligation.
Yeah, I have a question for you then, AJ. How much of our beef is shipped overseas instead of staying in America? And then how
Great
much,
question.
If we haven't covered this already, sorry, I had to go kiss the babies goodnight. And then how much beef is shipped into the United States from other countries instead of us just keeping our beef here? Do you have statistics on that?
Oh, dude, I wish I had them prepared. I should do that from now on. If you want to look it up, it's easy to find.
I'm gonna look it up for us. Yeah.
USDA makes it very easy to find. And so that'd be the best way to look at that. But you'll see that it's we've imported a significant percentage more this year than we did last. Like it's increasing, right? It makes sense. Our cattle numbers are decreasing. So we are increasing more. And so it's something like 22%.
If my knowledge serves, I think most of it's coming from South America. Is that correct or no?
Well, the majority was that Mexico, Canada. And then outside of that, I think it's South America and then Brazil because Brazil got put on hold for something. I don't know the details there, but
But it's a very interesting business model that we raise beef and we ship them overseas, and then we import beef from elsewhere to here. Like,
let's be clear, we don't. The Big Four do.
Yeah,
sure. But
Yeah.
I think the average American would then go, well, why aren't we just keeping beef from America in America? I mean, that would be the average American's like.
I mean, there's the wonky,
here, right?
Yeah, there's the wonky, like, oh, this is a part of an economic agreement that was made politically or whatever. We have to export a certain amount of foodstuffs or whatever. But so the USDA says approximately 10 to 15% of American grown beef is exported, while the vast majority, 85 to 90, is kept within the United States for domestic consumption. So apparently only a small bit is. This is U.S. beef exports account for 10 to 15% of total production, and they majorly go to Japan, South Korea, Mexico, Canada, and China. That's what it says, according to the USDA.
Yeah, and now look up the import.
So interesting to me.
The volume of
how much? Okay.
Just say how much beef is imported.
As he's looking that up, AJ, now I'm starting to wonder what they classify as beef, though, because based on the statistics that you gave me earlier, saying that the USDA is classifying steers, heifers, dairy cows at all as beef. Now I'm starting to wonder how are they not manipulating, but how are they statisticizing? I don't know how do you say that word. Like, where are they getting their numbers from to saying what beef is going and what beef is staying, right? Are we, the next logical question is are we sending all of our grade A Wagyu beef straight to Japan so that they can, you know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you this: the day we closed on the processing facility here in Cody, small town Cody, and it only does 35 head a week. We had a Chinese buyer sitting in our office the day we closed, and they wanted everything we produced. And they were going to pay for it, and they're going to pay great for it, and they would leave us frozen reefer shipping container for us to fill up, and when it was filled up, they'd come and grab it and send it away. And then I also know I have some friends that they're large cattle producers. They produce Wagyu cross. He's very good at it, the largest in the nation, one of the largest in the nation. And he's constantly being courted by Japanese buyers because he produces high quality beef. And for him, if he gets a good sell, great. He's an independent producer. American government sure as shit ain't helping him out. So he should definitely take that check and grow his operation. You know what I'm saying?
So, totally agree with you.
I don't blame him. But here's the other thing, just to tie that in. What I also don't know is, of the imports, how many of those are calves that they then raise and then sell to other countries as American beef?
Right. That's it. Does the USDA even track something like that?
I'm sure they do.
Tertiary.
Yeah.
It's like an aggregate percent. USDA says that 10 to 12% of beef consumed in the United States comes from imports, which is roughly 2.5 to 3 billion pounds of beef annually. And we import mostly from Canada, Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand, is what it says.
I wonder if those numbers are correct.
Yeah, it just
consider
reminds
the source.
Me, it
yeah,
just
no
reminds
doubt.
me of the idea that globalized economics promised us that supply chains would guarantee us greater amounts of product at lesser cost, right? Because the idea, and I had he's still one of my best friends to this day, but he was an economics major in college, and I was a small town farm kid from Wisconsin, and I was like, well, why shouldn't we buy American? And he sat me down one day and he goes, well, Chris, you just don't understand. It's like, if we have a globalized economy, through supply chains, the idea is, another place may be able to produce it cheaper than we can. And it comes back to us in that same pound of beef, since we're talking about beef, which may be, I'm going to throw out arbitrary numbers so that people can understand it. Like, a pound of beef may be $1 a pound that we can produce it, but if you get it from somewhere else, now it's 75 cents a pound because they can produce it cheaper over there. And don't you want cheaper, beef in your grocery store? That's the way he sold it to me. And even as a young guy, and this is back 18-year-old me, the very first thing I asked him, I said, okay, but what if the supply chain gets disrupted? And that was the very first question that I had. And he looked at me, he goes, listen, the supply chain is globalizing. That's not going to happen. Countries are, he said,
yeah, that definitely didn't happen during COVID.
Right. Well, this is what he said to me, and this was back in 2019. He said, listen, supply chains, 2009, because I was in college. He said, listen, supply chains are guaranteed because countries rely on other countries. Like, we're building economic alliances. So if one country goes down, another country will go down. But we've all seen 10 years after that, 11 years after that, what happened. The bulk of our antibiotics are produced in China.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that hurt the medical industry as soon as all of a sudden a global, I don't know, pandemic happens, and then China goes, well, screw you, because we're communists. We don't have to abide by our trade deals. We need this right now. You know, and the same thing, AJ, I wrote this down a little bit earlier, and this is a thing that we abide by in unconventional warfare doctrine. But no community, whether it's a country, a county, a small town, is ever 4 meals away from total chaos.
Yeah.
So understanding that, right? And Brandon, I do apologize if this is like diverting away from what you were talking about.
No,
Earlier.
No, you're good. Keep going. We'll come back to it.
But 4 meals away from total chaos, what can the average American do? And understanding what from the farm is, what can the average American do to shore up
Great question.
and like guarantee their family, their community's supply chain, right? In order to ensure that that doesn't happen to them.
Yeah. Awesome question.
Everybody's doing the prepper thing. Everybody's doing the whatever, but like, how can they do that?
Yeah, good question. Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. We don't have the right to not grow. If you're in an apartment, you can buy an indoor tower garden and learn how to grow food indoors. If you're in a community, you need to find, like, take out your grass and grow a garden. Like the grass, if you look into the history of grass, of lawns, and I can't rattle the stuff off the top of my head, but there's a bunch of interesting data around why that was promoted to not have gardens growing.
Mm-hmm.
And so now everybody's got manicured lawns that don't produce food. There's a company called Food Forest Abundance that we just became an affiliate with. And these guys they design a food forest based on what you have. And like, it's a small plot, big, and the design is important because I'm in Cody, Wyoming now. I live on 7.5 acres. I've got a live creek running right through the middle of it. I've planted a bunch of trees and they've all died because I didn't plan properly before I planted my trees. So
you got a willow tree?
My lemon tree died. Yeah.
The only trees I got are the ones that were here when I got here. My fruit trees died. I mean, I was like, so I told these guys, I'm like, I need you next time before I spend a dime, because that was a couple grand of trees that I just wasted. Mm-hmm. A proper plan, well executed, as we know, is the right way to do everything. And so
a shitty plan, well executed, is way better than a proper plan, shittily executed. That's the armyism. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think my food's more important than my life to risk it. I mean, when I'm young enough, I'm like, sure, let's go, but
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's funny. So growing your own food is where you start. Like what I see is we're back to the victory gardens of World War II when they said, hey, everybody, we got to feed our troops. So y'all need to grow gardens. Nobody's telling you that now because the people that are currently in charge want you not to be, they want you to be hungry. And so start growing something. The other thing is get involved in your local politics. Like, start talking about, and you're going to sound crazy. I mean, I talk about it here in Cody, but get involved in local politics and start talking about this. Southern Utah, St. George, where I'm from, when I left there 4 years ago, they grew about 4% of their food, 4%. And they were considered a smallish town. They're about 250,000 wide now, but now they grow less than 4% of their food. And they just promoted, as a way to conserve water, xeriscaping, which is the stupidest thing they could have done. And, that's the problem with I should say a challenge. I would imagine it's a very tough job when you're in city council, but you're making decisions that on infrastructure for your community that you're not seeing the long-term consequences of. So our town, we used to have farms and you could see the water come in regularly and floods were not common. Now, all of the farms or houses and neighborhoods, they're radiating heat off of the roofs and the driveways and the streets. And so now when the rain comes off the mountains, it splits and goes around. What would have been the proper information is either growing a food forest that has the right foods for your context, your climate, or just letting them become what they call prairie scaping, planting the natural vegetation for where you live, because the vegetation is what regulates the temperatures and the desert. There's a lot of videos out there where people will take a laser thermal, what do you call them? Like a thermometer, laser thermometer.
Okay.
And they'll point it at bare soil, and it'll be 117 degrees. And they'll move it just to the left where there's a little clump of grass, and it's like 89 degrees.
Wow.
So the reason that we're desertifying is there's not enough forage covering it. So people should be planting more. Take that responsibility. The next thing you do is find your local farmers and ranchers. Get to know the people growing your food. Shake the hand that feeds you. Human beings need three things: food, shelter, safety. I put water with food all the time, right? You need sustenance.
Yeah.
You need shelter. Yeah. And you need
Makes
safety.
Sense
Those are our
together.
basic human needs. And we're not even paying attention to number one.
Mm-hmm.
The most important one. Like if I'm hungry and I don't have shelter, I can still survive. It'll be miserable, but I can still, depending on where I'm at, I can probably still survive.
Yeah.
But I'm not hungry, right? So if I have food and no shelter, I'm good. If I have food and no shelter and no safety, I can find a way to be safe. But if I have no food, it don't matter where I'm living or what's keeping me safe. I'm dead. Yeah. And we're not paying attention. So start educating yourself on food. I would say that's the first thing. Just start learning. And then you'll learn, okay, what can I grow here? Or what do I want to grow here? And then you'll learn, okay, who do I want to find locally that can support me? And then the other thing is the more that you're supporting local, the more when they're in trouble, you can show up because they're your source of food. Mm-hmm. So now they're not fighting the battle on their own. My family are the Bundy Ranchers. So if you go look up Bundy Ranchers, they took on the federal government in 2016 and 2014. Yes. So they had a huge group show up for them because they understood what they were fighting.
That's your family, the Bundy family?
Yeah. Cliven's my grandma's brother, and Ammon is my second cousin. Yeah.
Wow.
So
okay. Yeah.
I grew up around this stuff, right? And so there's another guy, Amos Miller, the Amish farmer that got in a bunch.
I remember this.
He was being persecuted.
Love my Amish brothers.
Dude, his people showed up in strength, and he was they dropped everything. And so because he had
his local militia, his well-regulated militia, that Second Amendment, right, showed up. Oh man. Yeah. Sorry, I had to plug that.
Yeah. And even in Amos's case, they weren't even a militia, but just being present was enough to get public pressure to get it back off. We've seen this happen over and over again. So people just need to realize we have the power. We have to unify.
That's it,
in Oregon, they tried to force dairy farmers to small dairy. If you had one cow and you milked it on a improved area like gravel,
the CAFO thing in Oregon.
Yeah.
Right.
You now had to follow this. You were being pressured to follow the same regulations as big dairies because they knew that if they forced that on you, if you have one cow and you got to go put 10 grand, 15 grand of infrastructure for drainage and, whatever the rules were, you'd get rid of your cow. Yeah. And so the online community erupted and rallied and they backed off.
Well, I love that you said that because I think it segues perfectly into this whole Sustains Act thing, because what brought that on in Oregon? So we had a farmer, he's a Tillamook farmer in Oregon. So he didn't really feel a lot of what you're talking about. His name is Derek Josie. Awesome guy. If you don't know who he is, I recommend go checking him out. He posts a lot of pretty funny content too. But anyway, these environmental groups in Oregon are who went after these farmers, these dairy farmers in Oregon, under the guise of environmentalism and then, talking about the little guy, but really their actions really only hurt the little guy because farmers like Derek didn't feel the burn of what happened here. But when you consider what happens with the Sustains Act, literally these special interest groups like environmental groups, they can lobby the U.S. government and say, hey, you need to do these things and you need to pay. I'm going to pay you this money to make this stuff happen in the farming industry. And situations like what those farmers in Oregon went through would happen, I feel like, more often than not, because now these groups have an even bigger highway of access towards the government to lobby their issues and pay people off to push this nonsense essentially that just hurts the little guy.
Yeah.
You know what that reminds me of, Brandon? Everything you just said, Pastor
What's that?
Martin.
Oh yeah, you're right.
They came for this guy, and then I didn't really care because I wasn't a dairy farmer. And then they came for this guy, and I didn't care, right? And then it's the same thing that we see playing out time and time again. And now they came for me, and nobody will stand up for me because I'm all by myself.
Yeah,
it's the same. Yeah, you see it playing out time and time again. Everything you just said reminded me of that entire quote.
What would you say the average? Incredible. Yeah, the average. So a lot of people live in the city. I love it when
you guys
right?
ask us questions.
Yeah. What would you say the average consumer believes or thinks about rural America? The cowboys, the farmers,
flyover states, annoying. I actually
the people specifically, the culture. That's what I meant.
I actually took a video of myself today walking. I did a ruck, and where I live in Northern California, there's a ton of agriculture. Okay, so I took a video. There's all these orchards, nut trees, fruit trees, corn, tomatoes, all this stuff. And I said it's so crazy to me how blue the state of California is because of the cities, and that all of these farmers around here, I'm just walking by their fields on this ruck. These guys are literally growing the food that gets shipped into these cities to feed these people, and they vote against those people's interests all the fucking time. And that the infrastructure is so good that even though it's hurting these farmers, they still get fed, but they don't give a fuck about them. That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah, to your question.
And no, I appreciate that, because that's what I think too. And so I think that whole campaign on the Democrat side is that we're weird. You're conservative people, and that's the majority that's growing food. There are people that are more liberal getting into gardening and stuff, which is fine. Great. Glad you're growing.
Yeah.
But most of them are conservative, and they have this whole campaign that they're weird. They're segregating. They're separating. So this is why I asked, and the reason I bring it up. This book right here is called Red Famine. Famine. Yep. Red Famine is about the Holodomor, or I've been told Guladomor, however you pronounce it, that happened in Soviet Russia, 1932 to 33 is when the big window was, where like 7 million people died. I've heard from others, this was mostly around Ukraine during Stalin's rule. So 7 million people. Some people said, no, it was way more than that. They just, and they will tell you, nobody counted. They didn't want anybody to know. So the estimate is 7 million people starved to death. These are blue collar people. But they referred to them as peasants. So if you ever wonder what a peasant is, if that's what they think of blue collar. Yep. So what happens specifically when you read this book, Stalin got their urban communities to think that rural people were less than human. And so then when they started taking all of the grain from the farmers and then selling it across seas to make money and so forth, because even people in the cities were hungry. They didn't starve to death, but they were hungry. But the people who went out to those communities to execute Stalin's tasks were from the urban environments, because they had been brainwashed that they were subhuman. That's who enforced these rules.
Yep.
So now we live in America, and everybody I know in rural communities have far more weapons than people coming from the cities. So
damn right.
It'll be a different fight, but that's how they did it. They made urbanites think less of the people who are growing their food. And that's why I asked the question, what do you think the average person believes now? We are not far off.
No.
We need Trump and RFK to get in, or I think there's a high probability this is what we see.
For my part,
agree with you.
I think that the average human being in the urban settings, and I live just south of Seattle right now, I think they look at the areas, and I'm applying this to the context of our conversation. I think they look at the farms and the ranches and they don't see any change. I think they see wide open spaces. I think they see that it's
Interesting
continuing to
perspective.
it's continuing to be the way it's always been. They don't see buildings popping up there. So to them, it's like they're still growing cows, they're still growing corn.
Right.
What's the big deal? As their kids are continuing to get sicker and continuing to get more autism and continuing to their problems are propagating, but they see the landscape of the United States and they're like, I don't see the change that you guys are talking about. I don't think
Yep.
that they can contextualize it the
Nothing
way, and this is
drastic enough yet.
right, nothing has actually changed. And another great example to yours, AJ, is the Maoist revolution in China, because I'm way more up on my Asian politics and
Makes
history
sense.
than other continents. But if you look at that through the 1930s, through the Maoist revolution, they went through and the government seized the means of production for all the the Chinese farms and said, you're going to produce this now, we own it. And then they came in and to all the things that you're talking about, you're going to grow this now.
Yeah.
And that didn't necessarily grow in those fields where those Chinese farmers were used to growing, but they're like government subsidies. The government says I have to grow it. Okay, I'm going to grow this now. And now I can only produce 30% of this off my land, where I was able to produce, like, let's just say 60% of this off my land before, but I have to because the government says. And now the government comes in and says, "You give me your crop. Why aren't you producing more?" The land won't produce more. It only produces this much, but I'm growing what you said I have to grow. And then if you go back and you guys look at that, there are hundreds of millions that died in China during that takeover of the land. And it's because anytime the government comes in and says, you're going to grow this on your property, I don't care what you say, like, they don't know, right, the institutional knowledge that the farming family has, what they've been able to produce there, what grows there, what thrives there. They don't care. You're going to grow this. And then when they don't get it, then they're going to come back to you and be like, why isn't it producing? I don't know, because you said I had to grow this. And then boom, and then people starve to death all over China by the millions. They starve to death.
Wow.
And then, and it's like, it's another great example to what you were saying, but just, to wrap up the answer, I think the reason that when I see what the urbanite in America looks at the rural people in America, and what they see is, what's the big deal? I still see massive fields of corn. I still see beef growing. Like, I don't get
That's
what
a
you
great
guys are.
perspective.
I still get my corn maze in October.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I still can go out and pick my $20 pumpkin. I don't get what you guys are bitching about.
Yeah.
I think that's what the average urbanite says. And
I think
yeah.
I was say, I think your point is great, because it's poignant, because it's the same thing that happened in the example that AJ gave, is that the Stalinist government seized all of the land from these Ukrainian farmers and said, now we're going to do it, which is the same thing that happened with Mao. And it also contextualizes exactly for people maybe who, if you don't understand yet, I don't know how you couldn't, but why Putin wants Ukraine. It is the breadbasket of Europe. It provides all of this grain and feeds all of these people. So when he became president, elected, 24 years ago, he said he wanted to rebuild the old USSR. It's exactly what he meant, because that part of the Ukraine is exactly it. It's the food source. It's the breadbasket for the old USSR. That's exactly why he wants it. It's like the jewel in the middle of the crown, essentially, as it were, right?
Yeah, because
He needs
agriculture
it.
is the foundation. Yep.
100%. Yeah, that's it. And keep talking, because there's a quote that from Putin that I want to bring up, but I'll find it real fast for you guys. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so Putin moving into Ukraine, like you said, Brandon, absolutely represents. And if I was to bring this back to because this is what we talk about in this podcast a lot, AJ, is the politics of it and like free speech of it, right? But if we would have had underneath President Donald Trump, right, Putin like never would have thought about invading Ukraine. He never would have thought about it, right? Because Donald Trump said, we have these giant rockets. They're the biggest. They're the fastest. Fire and fury, right? That's what he said. Like, I'll fire them tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like, he didn't care. And then as soon as we have a Joe Biden presidency, right? And he made that statement, if I can remember, where they were like, well, what if Putin invades Ukraine? I think he said something like, well, that wouldn't matter on, well, that's what Harris said as VP. But I think Joe Biden said something like, well, it would matter like how the incursion happens and how much land he takes. It was something like akin to that. Like it would matter like how and when, like we'll kind of maybe respond, right? You remember that?
Yeah, and then, it happened under my watch when Barack was president too.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly, 2014. But no, 100% to both of you guys. And going back to the whole like Monsanto argument and like the globalization of food, Ukraine is absolutely, like you said, Brandon, the breadbasket of Europe. And a lot of people don't realize where all that grain gets transported to. And now that they're completely ingrained. Hey, I didn't mean to do that. Hey,
no pun intended.
In war, you're looking at the stuff in the grocery store just went up by 15-25%. Like your Tostitos,
and your rubles,
right? Your corn
your rubles
chips,
mean less.
Your freaking pizza rolls, like everything is like so much more expensive. And then all the same people that voted for him to get in there are like, why are my groceries more expensive? I don't understand. I just wanted Ukraine to be free. And then I want to tie that back into a thing that I said earlier about the globalization of the supply chain, right? And then to you, AJ, if this happens with the beef market, right? Like you will not be able to afford to eat beef. And so guess what you will have to settle for?
Crickets.
The fucking veggie burgers. You will eat the bugs and you will like it. You will own nothing and you will be happy. And that is everything that they are absolutely working toward. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have this guy on tonight, guys, so that you could listen to him is, and while Brandon continues to suss this out, AJ, I want to throw this over to you about.
I found that quote, by the way, too.
Oh, perfect. To rep your product. And how can Americans get closer to the people that raise their food and closer to the people that grow their beef?
Yeah. You can go to the farmer's market or look around yourself, but the resource we built was to simplify that. Ranchers are busy, hard to get a hold of. They've got so much to do that to make it easy to connect with consumers is the need. And so on from the farm, that's what we're doing. They can build their store simply, list their products. You can buy from them. Some of them will ship. Some of them will deliver within a certain area. A lot of them are making the transition to go in direct, whether it's their next generation that's coming behind them that's like, I want back on the ranch. I know a different way to make it work, right? The younger generation. I've met a lot of the older generation that they're awake to it and they're already doing it themselves anyway. They're like, nope, we're going to go direct, and then they employ their kids. We are going to help those that don't want to do all the fulfillment. At some point down the road, we're going to build regional fulfillment centers where they can sell it online, send it to a regional hub, still keep it fairly close. But, our country is not perfect in terms of, because of all of these things and how food is grown and where, or even climate wise. Phoenix, Arizona is a desert. They cannot fatten enough cattle to feed Phoenix, Arizona. So now I think you should buy everything you can locally first. And then when they're bought out, places like Wyoming, where I live, there's only 500,000 people in the whole state. There's a lot more cattle. So they don't have enough consumers to sell to. So we should take Montana and Wyoming beef that doesn't sell in Montana and Wyoming south and feed Las Vegas and Phoenix. And so we'll have
regional. This makes sense.
It sounds like you're recreating the railroad.
I mean,
a railroad would be nice.
Right?
It'd make it cheaper to get down there.
Brandon.
For sure. No, I was just going to say, to go back to the quote I was trying to find, was anyone who does not miss the Soviet Union has no heart. Anyone who wants it back has no brain. That's a Putin quote. I just think it's funny because it kind of is the hinge of his entire plot here for the past 24 years. He wants it back because of the nostalgic aspect, but he's doing it differently, essentially, is kind of the idea. But
that sounds to me like he was plagiarizing Churchill.
Could be.
Because Churchill said anybody that's young and is conservative
the
has no heart, and anybody that's old and liberal has no brain.
Very well could have been.
That's almost like he's plagiarizing Churchill. That's very interesting.
I mean, Putin would definitely have a wide breadth of history knowledge on World War II. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I didn't even think about that, Chris. Yeah. I laughed earlier when we were talking about the whole USDA things because I asked the ChatGPT to give me the source for this information. So right. And maybe I shouldn't use ChatGPT so much, but it is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
You'll never guess the website it kicked me to. The Natural Resources Conservation Service. And the article is USDA article on the Sustains Act is literally where it sent me to. How funny is that?
Well,
surprised, not surprised, you know?
Yeah. So recently the NRCS said, hey, we now have this thing called the Sustains Act, and we would like to hear from you, the public, how we should spend the money that we're taking that you didn't want us to take in the first place.
That's literally it.
For these programs. That's bullshit. They don't give a shit. They would have not done it in the first place if they actually cared. It's just, they're just placating. They really haven't. They're not going to listen. They're going to just pretend like they care what you have to say, and they're going to do what they want.
Old Reagan quote. I'm here from the government. From the government, I'm here to help.
Yeah, those are the 5 scariest words in the English language.
Yeah, and speaking of Reagan, Reagan was the next guy that destroyed our beef supply chain.
Oh no!
Can you?
Oh no!
I know he killed those.
He also took away our machine guns, just
trust laws and stuff like that.
Out there.
Yeah.
Well, when people say food is political, and it is, it's both left and right. The pendulum swings. You know, it was corporate control, good business, big business during Reagan's era. Like, let's see how much money we can make in America and make us lead. I get it. Well, now the pendulum, but then these are the downstream consequences. So what he did is he lifted the antitrust laws, allowing corporations to buy up other corporations, to what led to finally only 4 companies, right? He's the one that led to that. Now, when it was released, it was more like, hey, as long as it doesn't affect the cost to the American consumer, then that should be okay. I don't know if he knew. I mean, maybe he did, because it's been a plan to ruin our small farms and ranches, and no secret to the government. So maybe he knew
the for a long time.
I don't know. Yeah. But now the pendulum has swung, and now the liberals are using climate change for their agenda and pinning it out on agriculture.
It's all just a vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about.
Sorry, if you were to talk about, I didn't mean to cut you.
Well, I wasn't. I was going to say, when you talk about the transport of agriculture, that's what's causing the pollution. It's not the cows. That's why we say it's not the cows, it's the cows. It's when you're shipping containers full of frozen beef from one country to ours. Yeah. One super tanker on the ocean is equal to 45,000 cars on the highway.
So it's not the moos, it's the who's. Yeah. Yes. Do another one. I'll add that in there. Yeah.
That's good.
Were you thinking about that all night?
I do. I'm not gonna lie to you. The first time you said cows and hows, it's literally popped into my brain. I'm retarded. Yeah, don't mind me. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome.
You're the smartest of all.
Well, I would love to wrap up on something positive, like you wanted to. From the farm, obviously, this is when we talked, you described it as the Airbnb of the food industries, is what was one of your goals you'd like to be.
That's right.
Of local food, you said that. I love that. Do you guys how are you heading towards that goal? Do you guys have an app, or are you guys still just a website? Like, how are you simplifying this and making the barrier to entry into it for people wanting to use your product better? Like, how are you doing that?
Yeah, great question. So we went with web-based. So it's a website, fromthefarm.org. I think I would like it to be an app someday. I don't know. The reason we didn't start with an app, it's expensive. This is a lot of money to build. And when you're committed to never being sold or bought, you've got to do things differently.
You're right. You want to get into Apple Store or Google. Yeah.
I've been told since really I had a good grip on what this was going to look like by so many people. When we launched the pre-registration email list, we had 30,000 pre-launch emails. We hadn't even coded our first line. I said, hey, here's the idea I've been working on. We're going to start building it. If you're interested,
people want it.
I was told by software engineers, if you get 2,000 people interested, you go all in. So 30,000 is like unheard of. People want it. COVID woke a lot of people up. Yeah.
You're right.
And so, we have to do things differently. I can't go raise $100 million from venture capitalists because they're going to want to sell it. That's their goal. And if I'm going to put 100 million in, how fast can I make that 200?
Right.
That's their game. No,
Shark
whatever.
Tank.
Doesn't belong here. Belongs other places, not here.
Yeah.
So we raised $500,000 after we launched in March. So we soft launched in March. People have been buying on there. We've got 48 ranchers and farmers that are live across the country. And about 200 that are in some form of setup. Now we launched in spring, and if you know agriculture, spring is damn busy. And so they just haven't had time to think about what we're doing, So I anticipate more people will be getting on this winter because they'll have the capacity to think about it and build the store and so forth. So that's where we're at now. Now we launch our crowdfunding campaign on September 24th. So we got to do it different. Yep. And I didn't want to do a crowdfunding that was like, hey, put some money in, I'll give you a shirt. I wanted people to have skin in the game and get rewarded for what we're building. It's a community. We have to feed the people, by the people. That's how it has to go. And so our goal is 5 million on WeFunder. We're paying it's a rev share model. So for every $100, it's a minimum of 100, because we also wanted people that weren't certified investors to be able to get involved. So if you got $100, you can invest, and we're going to pay a 2x return over however long it takes us, and so we'll pay it back at 15% net annually. So the faster we grow, the faster you get your money back. If we grow fast enough, even in 5 years, that turns out to be a pretty dang good investment of your money. But most people are going to get involved because they want this to exist, not because of the return. So that's why they call it a community round. We're going to go to the people and say, are you worried about your food supply chain? Because if you are, we have spent 5 years building this and taken a huge risk, so you don't have to, but we do need your help. And you'll get something back if we're all successful and we all lean in.
I love that. I remember during COVID, all of the cargo ships that sat in the San Francisco harbor for fucking months, man. Yeah. You're right. It did wake everybody up. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was going to ask about something super selfish. Do you guys have a plan for the bones and the byproducts? Because my wife and I are doing quite a bit with bones and doing bone broth, and can I get on a mailing list?
Yeah,
I could use like any bones that you have left over. You want to send it to my house, because we're making bone broth like every day over here.
Yeah,
I am deadpan right now. I'm not even. This isn't a
shamelessly asking for bones.
That's awesome.
I'm asking for your beef bones.
So, I don't have any because that's not what I do. And the producers on our platform, that's actually become more valuable than the meat.
Really?
So there's nothing to give.
Really?
There's nothing to give.
That is awesome, though. That is awesome to hear.
Hey, you greenies. It sounds like no waste, too. Losers, get on board.
It is nose to tail for a lot of these people. The organ meats, they're hard to keep anymore. Now, a lot of people don't. If you eat organ meat, you're also aware that you want to eat organ meat from grass-fed and finished animals, not corn and grain.
You better put back on your tinfoil hat.
Yeah, I know.
on top of it, don't cover up.
It's on in spirit.
I know. Yeah.
He's like, it's always on, dude. Yeah.
if it's forage fed in a bunk, fine. But if you're scooping kernels of corn and grain to put a ton of fat on them, I've seen the research. Like, listen, I love a really good corn and grain finished steak. When I have friends over, I'm buying from my friends that raise amazing corn and grain finished steak. But daily, I eat grass-fed and finished steak because I know the nutrient values are different. It is their natural food, just like when we eat processed food, we are the result of that. Yep. Corn and grain in bulk is processed food for cows. You're eating,
and on top of that, for anybody that's into the outdoor sports, they know that venison and elk have like 20% higher protein per gram yield than beef do, because of the way that beef is raised in the United States. But the thing is, if you look at a true grass-fed raised beef cow or beef steer, then you start getting the same amount of protein per yield back into it. And so that's a lot of the thing. It's like you get your good burger right, and it's 80-20, or God help me, the best
You say
burger
good
in the
burger?
world, 75-25, right? With all that fat in it. Yeah, it makes a good burger, but it's like, it's all that corn and grain that creates the fat that's in your burger, that creates all that grease that makes it succulent. And it's like, yeah, it may be good to your tongue, but to the rest of your organs as you take it in, like, there's a lot of byproduct in there that you have to filter out, right? And so
definitely.
That's why people like venison and elk meat, right? Is because it's like, oh, it's so lean and it tastes so fresh, and it's like, yeah, because they're out eating the acorns and the
yeah, and,
they're not fed corn all day,
Yeah, and it can be gamey.
Genetically modified corn.
yeah, it can be gamey. Grass-fed and finished beef, it has a lot of times it's an acquired taste. Like my wife does not like. Now, I have had regenerative beef that you almost couldn't tell it wasn't corn and grain finished. But
interesting.
Look, there's a lot. It's like us as humans figuring out what nutrients work for your body. What works for me is not going to be the exact same for my wife or my daughters. It's just what my body needs. So there's a lot of producers that spend a lot of time and energy looking at their genetics and their cows and saying, okay, I have these genetics. What forage can I give them that's perfect for their genetics? And then they get the result of that. I've got a really good friend.
That breed of beef or whatever you're saying.
I've got a really good friend. His name's Billy. He's building his store right now. He owns a slaughterhouse. This guy used to be a world heavyweight champion boxer, Bronco Billy Wright, if you look him up. The dude's a monster. You shake his hand and it just wraps around your whole hand. Good dude. Man.
I'm on it.
Anyway, he bought a slaughterhouse and built it out. He bought the feedlot next to it. He built a butcher shop downtown in the town close by, and the local dairy. And so this guy's literally building the best possibility of food infrastructure for Southern Utah. And my job is to help them realize he's there and he's doing all these things that's good for them. Anyway, his hobby is his Wagyu beef, his American Wagyu. And they are born and raised in the feedlot on his property, but they're not compact. He'll have just a few head per bunk. So they got plenty of room, and he keeps it clean, and he feeds them because for him, his focus is to make the absolute best tasting American Wagyu anybody could ever buy.
29 first round knockouts.
Yeah.
Holy cow. 29 first round knockouts. Let me say it correctly. Nice. Good job, Bronco Billy.
Yeah, and
that's awesome.
Dude, he just turned 60 and he's going to fight again.
Oh my gosh.
He starts partner for
Is it Jake Paul he's fighting?
His championship fight.
No. So
that's awesome.
Tell me more. His hobby is this Wagyu. So, but I was talking to him and he goes, and I don't ever scoop feed out of a scoop. So in other words, usually your Wagyu need that extra fat. Like that's, my understanding is that's their genetics. But what he does is the grain that he feeds his Wagyu is on the stalk. He feeds them actual cultivated seed heads that are not highly processed. So if the cow is just wandering through the fields. Now, I don't know enough science to say what that does to the phytonutrients, essential amino acids, and so forth. But I'm telling you, if you ever want the most incredible steak you have ever had or ground beef, buy from that guy. It is a treat. I mean, it's expensive, but it's a treat.
Yeah. Treat.
The old school thing that they say is you are what you eat, right?
Yeah.
So if you're eating dead food, you're dead. And if the cow is eating dead food, the cow is dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Great point.
So I guess it just stands to reason. I mean,
some people will argue.
It sounds so simple. It makes so much sense, but it's just like we've gone so far off the trail with all this stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can find all these different people on the website. We just had 2 weeks ago, we had Travis Brown. Look him up, multi-UFC heavyweight champion, and Ronda Rousey is his wife.
Oh,
they have.
Know that one.
We know her.
I wanted to lead with Travis because he's the one I talked to, and he's a cool dude,
Yeah.
And he's got a great record in his own right. But they bought a ranch in Southeast Oregon, and it's called Browsey Acres, and they are now on our platform as well. And Travis is learning regenerative agriculture. So I have seen that more new first generation ranchers are going that route because they don't know any better. There's no handed down generational information that they're battling against.
Would
They're
he come on the pod?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll text him.
Okay.
I think he'd love that.
That'd be awesome.
We've got
shameless plug.
Yeah.
Dude, I want to learn. I want to hear more about them. People need to hear this stuff, man. For sure.
Yeah, I know, you're right.
And so we've got, it's just interesting, the people. And then you've got all of our amazing traditional producers, generational producers that are hanging on for generation after generation. And then they're willing to keep changing the way they see it to do it different so they can try to keep up and keep going. And these guys, that's the majority of who's on there, and they're incredible. And we're, for them to come onto our platform, you got to think these are people that have been promised time and time and time again, somebody's there to help them, and they get burned. And so for them to have the resilience to have me come along and be like, okay, we'll trust you. We get what you're doing. We hear what you're saying. We're going to trust you and get on board. That's why we can't sell, because they trust us to actually build a competitive marketplace that isn't just going to be sold off to the highest bidder and sell them down the line like every single person else has throughout recent history. So, so that's what we're here for. And we're going to push hard. We're going to raise this money. Then with that money, we grow it more. And, every decision we make will ensure that I have the majority control and my partner Brooke, so that it just doesn't get sold.
So you guys are not in this for a fast buck. Like,
no,
you guys are in this
changing the culture
haul and changing not just the culture, but how food is made and where it comes from. So that segues into actually the number one question that I actually had for you coming into this podcast tonight. If I can, let's say there's a young man out there that hears this podcast and maybe he's from the Northeast, or he's from, New York City or something. Say an urbanite has a dream about getting into ranching. He wants to go be a cowboy. He saw Yellowstone. He wants to go be Dutton. He wants to do that. Is there an actual path for a young man to get into ranching? Like, what does that look like? How could a young man do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know there's organizations out there that will help. Unfortunately, I don't know them, but I would say it's like I teach my kids. You're the one in charge. How bad you want it is up to how hard you're going to go work for it. My daughter, she came to us one day and she's like, "Hey, I made the cheer team." And I'm like, "What? You made the cheer team?" Because they're homeschooled. And so they're not even in school.
All right.
I was like, "You made the cheer team?"
We homeschool too, AJ.
Yeah, perfect. And I was like, "You made the cheer team?" And she goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "How'd you do that?" And she goes, "I found out who the cheer coach was. Somebody gave me her number. I've been texting her. She sent me the tryout videos. I've been sending her the tryout videos, and I made the team." And I was like, "Holy shit."
Good for you.
I'm like,
networked it.
I said, "Sweetheart, I am so happy you made the cheer team because that's what you want to do. But I am more proud that you found your way there without me. You are proactive. So far ahead of the game when it comes to your peers."
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So to that point, I kind of lost my train of thought there. So
proud dad moment.
If somebody really wants to do that, they should call farmers and ranchers all over the West and say, "I would love to be a free hand. Feed me, shelter me, and I'll work my ass off. I don't know anything, so that's why I'm only asking for food and shelter. What else do you need? If you want it that bad, I say that's where you start, because most of these guys are not making enough money to pay you, but they can feed and shelter you, and I'll tell you, it'll be an adventure of a lifetime." I want to plug my cousin real quick. If you go look up Anchor Brand Ranch on YouTube and you're interested in this at all, you will love it. It is a day in the life of an actual rancher. This is my cousin that has that 40-acre parcel on 600,000 acres of deeded land. And so they're running a big ranch in the desert. You get to deal with all the water lines and all the improvements and chasing cattle, and most of the time you're going to be fixing equipment because you don't got enough money to pay a mechanic. So you're doing it yourself, but that's the real life of a rancher. If you think you're going to go and just be a cowboy on a horse, that's the other thing. You got to know what the job looks like. Now you can find a summer internship just rounding up cattle. But you won't really learn what it's like to be a rancher unless you get on somewhere and just be a ranch hand.
That's a great answer.
I'm so glad that you said it that way. My wife's cousin, I won't say his name because if he found out that I was talking about him on a podcast, he'd probably call me and beat my ass. But dude had a dream. His family owned a ranch up in Alaska, and his dream was to ride from his ranch in Alaska from the U.S. border, northern Montana, all the way to the Mexico border. And he took 2 horses and a dog. It took him 2.5 years, if I remember correct. This is the story, the family story, but he did it, and he wintered in Wyoming one year, and then he wintered, I think, in either southern Colorado. I think it was southern Colorado the next year, and then made the Mexico border the year after that. And he rode 2 horses, and he worked on ranches the entire way. And that's all he did.
Dang.
And it was the same story. And he's, to this day, he's the only guy that I know in modern history that's ever done that. And that was just because it was his dream. He just said, I'm going to ride a horse from the United States northern border all the way down to the Mexico border.
That is incredible.
He's still a rancher. He's still a rancher to this day. And that's what he does. And it was just all the relationships he made along the way. I believe he lost a dog on the trail. I believe he traded out a horse at one ranch and got another horse, but he did it, and he completed his dream. And
that's cool,
his brother, God rest his soul, actually passed buds and was going to be a Navy SEAL, and then died in a motorcycle accident, unfortunately.
Oh man!
But him and his brother both were just men above men. They were just up here, where it's just like, I'm going to go do a thing, and they just went out and did it. Like, no money, no nothing. They're just like, I'm just going to go do it. And they just did.
That's so awesome.
I do want to tell this story because it's the only time that I ever actually got to like meet and speak to him. My wife and I had just gotten married. I was 20 years old and I hadn't yet reported to the Army. And we went to a supper club in Wisconsin, and he was there. Came walking in, he was drinking a beer at the bar, and my wife was like, "Oh, this is my cousin." And I was like, "Oh, it's nice to meet you." And he goes, "Oh, hey, it's nice to meet you too. You're Hannah's husband, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You want a beer?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm 20." And he goes, "Yeah, okay. You want a beer?"
That's awesome.
And I was like,
and
that was, yeah. And I was like,
that's awesome. That is so awesome.
He's an awesome dude. He is an awesome dude to this day. But
way cool.
Great story.
I want the world to know what he accomplished, because that's amazing. And it ties exactly into your story. If you want something, go out and do it. The only thing that stands between you and doing something, like, people think that like somebody else has to give you some type of like certificate, or somebody else has to like, bless off on a thing that you do. Like, no. If you want to do something, the only thing that stands between you and that, my young man, my young dude, is your motivation.
Yeah.
Go out and do a thing. That's what I have on that. Thanks, AJ.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome.
No, I think it's a great place to wrap up. And I think always like to try to tie in something that Chris and I have built here on the podcast. We call it the Ignis Compact. It's something we can point out for people who follow us and say, hey, these are the principles that we try to stick to. But one of them, and I think you'll get why I mentioned it, is that citizenship is not passive, and that it's exactly what you're doing. You said you have no right not to grow your own food. I think that's such a great way to say that, right? No one knows you anything. Citizenship is not passive. And the more it becomes passive, the less you are involved, the less freedom you have. And those things correlate to each other 100%. So I just think that's a great way to wrap that up. And I really appreciate you coming and talking to us. I'd like to have you on again in the future to learn how everything's going. Next time you're on, I'd love to talk more about your Escalante Desert project that you had mentioned. Yeah. That sounds really cool. And but no, thank you so much for coming on, AJ. I learned a lot. I hope everybody learned a lot. That was my goal, was to try and learn from somebody who's in this and bring awareness to it. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was probably the easiest podcast I've been on. You guys are really fun to talk to. And
hell yeah.
I felt like I was hanging out and I'd already known you guys. So this is good. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Too easy, man. Thank you. We appreciate it. Yeah. That's the plot. That's the plot.
Nice.
Thank you, AJ.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Have a good night.
You too.